What would you say if I told you that in the brutal, grinding war in Italy, a single American soldier, a man from the Muscogee Creek Nation, stopped an entire German advance and destroyed their armored defense, not with artillery or air power, but with a bazooka fired from a distance considered absolutely suicidal? What would you think if I showed you the military records proving this man, Technical Sergeant Van T. Barfoot, stood just 75 yards from a deadly German Panzer tank and took it out in a single shot, opening the road for his entire company? The year is 1944. The place is the unforgiving battlefield near Carano, Italy. American progress is stalled. 3 German Panzer tanks, supported by heavy infantry, have turned a crucial crossroads into a killing zone. Every advance by the American company is met with devastating fire. The men are pinned down, facing a wall of steel and fire, and the mission seems impossible. Suddenly, a solitary figure emerges from the trees. This is Van T. Barfoot. He understands that if his company is to advance, he cannot wait for help. He makes a fateful decision. He will take on the tanks alone. He carried the anti-tank weapon that was notoriously difficult to use, the M1 Bazooka, and he walked straight into the enemy's fire. This is the story of a warrior whose actions on this single day would define his life, earning him the nation's highest award for valor, the Medal of Honor. From 75 yards away, he would unleash a volley of rockets that would shake the German line, destroy 2 tanks, and clear the path. But his heroism didn't stop there. He followed the bazooka attack by clearing enemy rifle pits and capturing 17 German prisoners. He was, for a few crucial hours, a one-man army. Before we dive into the extraordinary details of that day and the long, distinguished life that followed, I need you to do something for me. Drop a comment right now telling me where you are watching from, what city, what state, what country. And if you want more stories of genuine American heroism like this one, then hit that subscribe button. Engaging with the video helps the algorithm boost this vital history, ensuring these incredible truths about courage and duty are not forgotten. Help us keep these stories alive. Van Thomas Barfoot was born on June 15, 1919, in Edinburgh, Mississippi, but his family soon moved back to the land he would always consider home, Wagoner County, Oklahoma. This was the heart of the Creek Nation, and Barfoot was proud of his heritage, a descendant of the Muscogee Creek people. He was 1/8 Muscogee, a lineage that connected him to a long, proud history of warriors and leaders. Growing up on a farm, life was defined by hard work and the deeply ingrained values of the Muscogee community. He learned early on the importance of self-reliance, observation, and the ability to track and hunt, skills that would later serve him in the brutal landscape of war. Barfoot was naturally athletic, a skilled marksman, and possessed a quiet determination that set him apart. The world of the 1920s and 30s was still reeling from the effects of World War I, and soon the Great Depression. Opportunities were scarce. For a young man in rural Oklahoma, the military offered a chance for stability, adventure, and the opportunity to serve a nation that was moving ever closer to another global conflict. The tradition of Native American military service is long and distinguished, stretching back to the earliest days of the United States. In both World Wars, Native Americans volunteered in huge numbers, often at rates higher than any other demographic. They brought with them a reputation for extraordinary courage, stealth, and an unmatched ability to thrive in hostile environments. Van Barfoot was now stepping into that long, distinguished line. At the age of 19, like so many young men of his generation, Barfoot made a decision that would alter the course of his life. He left the quiet fields of Oklahoma for the rigid, demanding life of the military. The journey of the farm boy was about to become the journey of the soldier. In 1940, as tensions escalated in Europe and the Pacific, Van Barfoot enlisted in the United States Army. He was ready for the call. He started his career in the 32nd Division, but was soon transferred to a new elite unit that was being rapidly organized and trained for the eventual fight overseas, the 157th Infantry Regiment. This unit was part of the 45th Infantry Division, nicknamed the Thunderbird Division. The 45th was primarily composed of National Guard troops from Oklahoma, Arizona, Colorado, and New Mexico, states with large Native American populations. The division's famous shoulder patch, a distinctive bright red and yellow Thunderbird, was chosen specifically to reflect this heritage. This symbol, sacred to many southwestern tribes, became an emblem of their unique contribution to the war effort. Barfoot quickly distinguished himself. He was a natural soldier, disciplined, highly competent, and calm under pressure. He rose through the ranks, proving his mettle in training exercises that simulated the harsh realities of combat. The training in the United States was rigorous, focusing on physical endurance, marksmanship, and unit cohesion. But nothing truly prepares a soldier for the reality of war. As the United States was drawn into World War II following the attack on Pearl Harbor, the 45th Division was among the first National Guard units to be sent into the thick of the fighting. Their training was now complete. Their mission was clear: drive the Axis powers out of North Africa and then on to the European mainland. Barfoot was more than ready. He carried the pride of his heritage and the rigorous training of his unit into the greatest global conflict the world had ever seen. He was no longer just a farm boy. He was a key non-commissioned officer, a leader, and a highly skilled warrior, about to face his baptism by fire on the beaches of North Africa. Van Barfoot's first taste of combat came not in Europe, but in North Africa. After a grueling journey across the Atlantic, the 45th Division joined the Allied forces in Tunisia, tasked with defeating the last major German and Italian resistance on the African continent. This was a brutal proving ground. The heat, the terrain, and the fanatical defense of the Axis troops demanded an immediate, steep learning curve. Barfoot and his comrades proved their resilience here. With North Africa secured, the next objective was the invasion of Sicily, Operation Husky, in July 1943. This was the first major step onto European soil and the largest amphibious landing of the war to date. The 45th Division was among the spearhead units. Landing on the beaches under enemy fire is a chaotic, terrifying experience, but the soldiers of the 45th, including Barfoot, performed with distinction. Their fighting spirit was instrumental in the rapid drive across the island. The lessons learned in Sicily were invaluable: the importance of quick movement, the necessity of dealing with heavily entrenched positions, and the reality of fighting a highly professional and desperate enemy. Barfoot was promoted to Technical Sergeant, a testament to his performance and leadership in the field. After Sicily was secured, the Allied forces turned their attention to the Italian mainland. This campaign would prove to be one of the most frustrating and costly theaters of the entire war. The terrain itself, mountainous, narrow, and easily defended, played perfectly into the hands of the German forces. Italy became a slog. The German forces, though outnumbered, were masters of defensive warfare. They established a series of fortified lines, most famously the Gustav Line, using the high ground to their advantage and forcing the Allied troops to fight uphill, literally and figuratively, for every mile. It was here, in the cold, wet, unforgiving mountains of Italy, that Technical Sergeant Van Barfoot would face the challenge that would cement his legendary status. By the early months of 1944, the American Fifth Army and the British Eighth Army were deeply entrenched in the Italian mountains. The weather was a constant, grueling enemy. Rain turned the landscape into thick, impassable mud, and freezing temperatures made every moment of trench warfare a miserable struggle. Progress was measured in yards, sometimes feet. This was not the glamorous advance that many soldiers had envisioned. It was a battle of attrition, sheer willpower, and survival. The German commander, Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, had masterfully used the terrain to his advantage, ensuring that every key route was covered by pre-sighted artillery and fortified positions. One of the most important objectives for the 45th Division was the town of Cisterna di Littoria and the surrounding area, a gateway to the crucial Anzio beachhead and Rome itself. The 157th Infantry Regiment was ordered to clear a key road junction near the town of Carentan, not to be confused with the French town. This road was a logistical necessity. It would allow American supply lines and reinforcements to move forward. But the Germans knew its value and had turned the area into a formidable defensive strongpoint. The terrain around the road junction was a nightmare. Dense woods, steep ridges, and open fields, all overlooked by German positions. It was a perfect trap. As Barfoot's Company L moved to advance, they immediately came under devastating fire from enemy artillery, mortars, and hidden machine gun nests. The advance stalled. The company was pinned down. Casualties were mounting. The greatest threat, however, was still concealed. German tanks, deadly Panzer IVs, and possibly newer, even heavier models, were positioned to guard the junction, ready to unleash armor-piercing shells on any advancing American soldier. The situation was dire. The company was facing a choice: retreat and fail the mission, or find a way to break the deadlock. Technical Sergeant Barfoot, observing the chaos and the deadly stalemate, knew that a bold, immediate action was required. He wasn't a leader of men in the traditional sense, but he was a leader by example. He reached for the weapon that was about to make history, the M1 rocket launcher, better known as the Bazooka. May 23, 1944. The moment of truth. The American attack was completely stopped. German fire was too intense, and the presence of 3 tanks made any forward movement suicidal. Technical Sergeant Barfoot saw that the tanks were positioned near a crucial roadblock the Germans had established. They were essentially static fortresses, daring anyone to approach. Barfoot realized that the only way to save his company and achieve the objective was to remove the tanks. No air support was available. Artillery was not precise enough. It had to be done by hand. The only portable anti-tank weapon they had was the bazooka, and Barfoot was one of the few men skilled and brave enough to use it against a moving, living threat. The bazooka was an incredible weapon for its time, but it was not a magic bullet. It fired a single rocket that had to hit an armored vehicle at a vulnerable spot, and it required the operator to be perilously close to the target. Standard doctrine called for the operator to be no closer than 100 yards, and often far more. But Barfoot knew the German position was too heavily covered to attack from that distance. He made the terrifying decision to cut the distance in half. Leaving the relative cover of his company's position, Barfoot began a solo journey into no man's land. He didn't run directly. He moved with the stealth and caution honed on the Muscogee lands of Oklahoma. Crawling through the thick underbrush, moving from shadow to shadow, he evaded detection from the German snipers and forward observers who were meticulously scanning the area. He finally reached a concealed ditch that offered a clear, if short-lived, line of sight to the tanks. He was now only about 75 yards away from the nearest Panzer. This was an unbelievably short range, close enough that he could clearly hear the engines idling and see the machine guns mounted on the tank turrets. At this distance, the smallest movement, the slightest sound, would bring immediate, devastating fire down upon him. Laying flat, he steadied the heavy tube of the bazooka. He had only a limited number of rockets. This was not a moment for hesitation or a warm-up shot. He had to make the first one count. His entire company, the fate of the advance, and perhaps his own life rested on the next few moments. He took a deep breath, aimed for the vulnerable underbelly and side of the nearest tank, and prepared to fire. With the tension of the battlefield mounting, Barfoot squeezed the trigger. The bazooka roared, sending a fiery, high-explosive anti-tank heat rocket streaking toward the nearest German Panzer tank. Boom! The rocket hit the heavy armor plate of the tank's side. The enemy crew inside had no time to react. The blast was instantaneous and catastrophic. Smoke billowed from the tank as the armor was breached. The first tank was immediately disabled, its crew either killed or scrambling to escape the burning wreckage. The sudden explosion sent a shockwave through the German line. But Barfoot had no time to celebrate or even watch. The other two tanks, suddenly alerted, began swiveling their turrets, attempting to locate the source of the attack. They were a powerful threat, capable of wiping out Barfoot and his entire company with their main guns. He quickly reloaded his bazooka, performing the complex, frantic operation under fire. He ignored the adrenaline, the fear, and the inevitable return fire now starting to pepper the ground around his position. He focused only on the next target. Barfoot sighted the second Panzer. This time the crew was fully aware, and their machine guns were searching for him. The situation was more dangerous now, as he was firing a rocket, giving away his position with a trail of smoke and a flash. Barfoot fired again. Boom! The second rocket found its mark, slamming into the tank. This one was even more effective than the first. The tank was immediately engulfed in flames, its main gun slewing uselessly to one side. In a matter of minutes, Barfoot had destroyed 2 German tanks with only 2 shots, crippling the enemy's armored defense. The speed and accuracy of the attack were virtually unheard of, especially from such a close, exposed position. The soldiers in Company L, watching from their pinned-down positions, roared with a mix of disbelief and renewed hope. The third tank, realizing the extreme danger, began to back away, retreating rapidly from the crossroads. The main threat to the American advance was now gone. But Barfoot's job was only half done. The tank attack had cleared the steel, but the German infantry was still heavily entrenched, scattered in rifle pits and machine gun nests surrounding the road junction. The entire enemy position was now reeling from the shock of the tank losses, but they were still heavily armed and dangerous. Instead of retreating to his company, which would have been a heroic act in itself, Barfoot kept moving forward. He dropped the now empty bazooka, grabbed his M1 rifle, and began to advance on the remaining enemy positions. He was about to turn his defensive feat into an offensive rampage. Having eliminated the armored threat, Technical Sergeant Barfoot transitioned seamlessly from anti-tank specialist to infantry warrior. The destruction of the 2 Panzers had been a massive psychological blow to the German defenders, but they were hardened troops and they were still actively fighting from their fortified positions. Barfoot knew he had to press the advantage while the enemy was disoriented. The first threat he targeted was a line of rifle pits, small, foxhole-like positions that were spewing concentrated fire toward his pinned-down company. These pits were cleverly concealed and difficult to dislodge with conventional fire. Moving with the speed and unpredictability of a hunter, Barfoot used the terrain, the smoke from the burning tanks, and the momentary pause in the heaviest German fire to his advantage. He approached the rifle pits from an oblique angle, surprising the German soldiers who were focused only on the American main line. He didn't rely on suppressing fire, he relied on shock and speed. Bursting from cover, rifle in hand, he attacked the pits one after another. This was close-quarters combat, brutal and immediate. He cleared the first set of rifle pits with rifle fire and grenades, moving so fast that the remaining German troops had no time to coordinate their defense. The effect of this single aggressive advance was devastating. German soldiers who had been fighting fiercely moments before were now demoralized, seeing the destruction of their tanks and the sight of a lone, fearless American soldier attacking their positions. This was less a military operation and more a pure display of individual courage and skill. Barfoot was relying on his M1 rifle, his grenades, and his sheer determination. He understood that in war, momentum is everything. By keeping the pressure on and refusing to stop after the bazooka attack, he prevented the Germans from regrouping or re-establishing their defensive fire lanes. As he cleared the rifle pits, he secured the immediate left flank of the crucial crossroads, effectively creating a pocket of safety for his own company to begin moving up. But the key to the entire junction still remained, a deeply entrenched German machine gun nest that commanded the entire road. The German MG-42 machine gun, known to Allied troops as Hitler's buzzsaw for its high rate of fire, was the deadly centerpiece of the enemy position. It was housed in a carefully constructed bunker, protected by sandbags and logs, and its sustained fire had been the primary reason Company L was unable to advance. Its position gave the Germans total control over the road. Barfoot, though exhausted from the tank assault and the rifle pit clearing, understood that as long as the MG-42 was firing, the company remained stalled. He began a new, even riskier maneuver. He started a wide, circling movement, using the natural depressions and dense foliage to work his way around the machine gun nest to its completely unprotected rear. This flanking move required immense patience and skill. He had to be entirely silent and invisible, as the slightest sound would alert the gun crew, turning their terrifying weapon directly onto him. He moved with the instincts he had learned growing up in the forests of Oklahoma, utilizing every piece of natural cover. When he finally reached a position directly behind the machine gun nest, he found a shocking situation. In addition to the two-man gun crew, there was a sizable group of German infantrymen who had been using the bunker as their command and control post. They were not expecting an attack from this direction. Without a second thought, Barfoot rose from his concealed position and opened fire with his M1 rifle, focusing first on the machine gun crew. They were taken completely by surprise. The sudden attack neutralized the gun and threw the entire command element into chaos. As the German soldiers scattered, bewildered and unable to form a counterattack, Barfoot yelled for them to surrender. The combination of the shock, the loss of their command, and the earlier devastation caused by the tank attack proved too much. One by one, the German soldiers dropped their weapons. In this incredible act of daring and audacity, Technical Sergeant Van T. Barfoot alone secured the strongest part of the German defense and took 17 German soldiers as prisoners of war. The silence that followed the capture of the machine gun nest was deafening, a stark contrast to the roar of battle just moments before. Company L, having witnessed the incredible sight of their comrade destroying 2 tanks and then disappearing only to return with 17 prisoners, finally began its advance. The way forward was now wide open. Barfoot quickly supervised the collection of the prisoners, ensuring they were disarmed and secured. The road junction was finally in American hands. The entire action, from the first bazooka shot to the final surrender, had been conducted almost entirely by one man, changing the course of the battle for that sector. The successful capture of this crucial crossroads near Carano was a significant victory. It broke the German defensive line in that specific area and allowed the supply vehicles and reinforcements to move forward, and directly contributed to the success of the broader American offensive toward the Anzio beachhead. The immediate relief and gratitude of his fellow soldiers were overwhelming. They had been trapped, facing annihilation, and Barfoot's solitary heroism had saved them. But for Barfoot himself, the action was simply part of his duty. He was a professional soldier who saw a critical problem, an existential threat to his unit, and took the most direct action necessary to solve it, regardless of the personal risk. Even after his phenomenal single-handed rampage, Barfoot's day was not over. Later that afternoon, he volunteered to lead 2 soldiers in carrying a seriously wounded officer through intense German shelling to an aid station, another act of bravery that went above and beyond the call of duty. The official documents detailing Technical Sergeant Van T. Barfoot's actions near Carano, Italy, made their way up the chain of command, reviewed and signed off by generals who recognized the almost unbelievable scope of his personal heroism. His deeds were beyond the requirements of any combat assignment. They spoke of a depth of courage and aggressive determination rarely seen. The recognition was swift and absolute. On September 21, 1944, Van T. Barfoot was formally awarded the Medal of Honor, the nation's highest decoration for valor in combat. The official citation read, in part, for extraordinary heroism and gallantry in action on 23 May 1944. Technical Sergeant Barfoot advanced alone to a point about 75 yards from the enemy position and fired his bazooka, destroying a light machine gun emplacement and killing 2 men. He then destroyed a second machine gun emplacement and killed 2 more men. Finally, he used his rifle and grenades to neutralize a strong point, capturing 17 German prisoners. The citation, of course, also specifically mentioned the destruction of the 2 tanks. The award was presented to him by Lieutenant General Lucian K. Truscott, Jr., commander of the Fifth Army, in a solemn ceremony held in the field. To receive the Medal of Honor while still actively serving in a combat zone is incredibly rare, a testament to the urgency and prominence of his actions. For Barfoot, the ceremony was a quiet, humble affair. He did not seek the spotlight. When asked about his incredible feat of destroying 2 tanks and capturing 17 men, he consistently downplayed his role, often stating simply that he was just doing his job. This humility became a defining characteristic of his life. He saw himself as a servant of his unit and his country, not as a solitary hero. The Medal of Honor is more than a medal. It is a permanent burden of expectation. It means the recipient must forever represent the very best of military courage. For Van Barfoot, this honor was also a recognition of the fierce warrior spirit he carried from his Muscogee heritage, proving that a single individual, armed with courage and skill, could change the course of a major battle.
After the Medal of Honor ceremony, the story of the Native American Bazooka warrior quickly spread. Van Barfoot was flown back to the United States and became one of the most recognizable faces of American heroism during World War II. He was no longer just a technical sergeant. He was a national symbol of the fighting spirit that was turning the tide of the war. His return to America placed him in a whirlwind of attention he never sought. He participated in war bond drives, traveling the country to rally public support for the war effort. His presence, simple sincerity, and genuine modesty resonated deeply with Americans weary of the long conflict. He represented the common man performing an uncommon act. His heritage was also widely celebrated. The story of the Thunderbird Division's hero, the Muscogee soldier who destroyed the German Panzers, highlighted the vital and often unrecognized contributions of Native Americans to the U.S. Armed Forces. This was a moment of pride for the Creek Nation and for all Native American communities. Despite the fame, Barfoot remained grounded. The medals, the parades, and the public applause did not change the core of the man. He was deeply uncomfortable with the spotlight, preferring the company of soldiers and the quiet camaraderie of military life. He never sought to capitalize on his fame. The public appearances were a duty, just like fighting the enemy, and he performed them dutifully. But his heart remained with his comrades still fighting in Europe and the Pacific. The life of a national celebrity was temporary, but the life of a soldier, he felt, was permanent. After his required tour of duty in the States, Barfoot was given the opportunity to accept an honorable discharge and return home to a hero's welcome. For most soldiers who had seen the worst of combat, this would have been an easy choice. But Van Barfoot had other plans.
The vast majority of soldiers who survived World War II went home, eager to pick up their lives, start families, and enjoy the peace they had earned. But for Van Barfoot, the experience of military service had become more than just a job. It was a vocation. He felt a deep, abiding connection to the values of the Army: discipline, service, and duty. He decided not to take his discharge. Instead, following the defeat of the Axis powers, Technical Sergeant Barfoot made the remarkable decision to re-enlist in the Army, signaling his intention to make the military his lifelong career. This decision allowed him to pursue an officer's commission. His bravery in Italy had already proven his exceptional leadership potential. He attended Officer Candidate School, OCS, and upon graduation was commissioned as a second lieutenant. This was a major transition, moving from a highly respected non-commissioned officer to a commissioned officer, a leader responsible for planning and executing military operations. The post-war Army was changing, rapidly professionalizing and modernizing. Barfoot was now part of the structure tasked with maintaining global security in the emerging Cold War. His experience was invaluable. He didn't just carry the badge of the Medal of Honor, he carried the practical, lethal knowledge of how to lead men and win battles against a determined enemy. His decision to stay in the service was a profound statement of his character. He was not looking for a quick exit or a comfortable retirement. He was committed to a life of service, a commitment that would soon put him back on the front lines as global conflicts continued to erupt. The world had barely finished recovering from one war when the shadow of the next was already forming, and Lieutenant Van Barfoot was ready for the call.
Van T. Barfoot's long military career was far from defined solely by the action in Italy. He was a professional soldier who answered the call of duty during the next two major conflicts of the 20th century, the Korean War and the Vietnam War. As a commissioned officer, Barfoot served with distinction in Korea in the early 1950s. The fighting on the Korean peninsula was often as brutal and cold as the mountains of Italy, testing the resolve of American forces against a determined and often overwhelming enemy. Barfoot's leadership skills, honed by his World War II experience, were crucial in leading and training younger, less experienced troops. He continued to serve through the 1950s and 1960s, rising steadily through the ranks. His next overseas tour of duty was in Vietnam. By this time, he was a senior officer, often serving in advisory or logistical roles, ensuring that the younger generations of American soldiers had the support and strategic guidance they needed. Barfoot's constant redeployment and his continuous service across three major wars, World War II, Korea, and Vietnam, spoke volumes about his dedication. He was not a man who ever asked his subordinates to do anything he was unwilling to do himself. His career became a living example of the motto he lived by: duty, honor, country. In every assignment, whether in the chaos of battle or the complexities of a military headquarters, he brought the same quiet competence and humility that had defined his actions in Italy. He was a pillar of the American military, an institutional memory of valor, and a role model for every soldier who served beside him.
After more than 3 decades of continuous service spanning some of the most intense periods of modern military history, Van T. Barfoot finally retired from active duty. He left the United States Army in 1974 with the rank of colonel. To retire as a colonel after enlisting as a private in 1940 is a monumental achievement, reflecting not only his bravery, but his intellectual capacity, his leadership, and his dedication to professional development. His military decorations filled several rows, anchored always by the distinguished blue ribbon of the Medal of Honor. Colonel Barfoot's retirement did not mean an end to his service or his activism. He settled in Virginia and remained a vital member of the military community. He dedicated much of his time to working with veterans organizations, sharing his experiences and advocating for the men and women who had served the country. He became a respected figure at veteran events, often meeting with young recruits and officers, always offering encouragement and advice rooted in the hard-won wisdom of a combat veteran. He maintained his simple, humble demeanor, never seeking to glorify war, but always seeking to honor the warriors. He understood that the true cost of freedom is measured in the sacrifices of the individual soldier. His later years were a time of peace, but they were not without their own quiet battles. Colonel Barfoot was a man of firm convictions, and he would eventually make headlines one last time, proving that the warrior spirit he displayed in Italy had not faded with age.
This time, the fight wouldn't be against Panzer tanks, but against a bureaucratic intrusion into his personal life.
Throughout his long life, Van T. Barfoot never lost sight of his origins. His identity as a member of the Muscogee Creek Nation was a deep source of pride. He saw his military service not just as a duty to the United States, but as a continuation of a noble warrior tradition within his people. The contributions of Native American soldiers to the U.S. military are massive and historically underappreciated. From the code talkers of both world wars to the thousands who served in Korea and Vietnam, Native Americans have fought and died for the country in disproportionately high numbers. Barfoot embodied this tradition. His stealth, resilience, and sharp focus in combat, qualities often attributed to his upbringing and heritage, were key to his success in Italy. He was a living symbol of how a deep connection to land and culture can translate into unmatched strength on the battlefield. He used his status as a Medal of Honor recipient to quietly champion the recognition of Native American veterans. He was a role model for young Native American men and women considering a career in the armed forces, demonstrating that service and cultural pride were not mutually exclusive, but deeply intertwined. His story stood as a powerful reminder that American military heroism draws strength from all corners of its society and from all its diverse histories. He carried the Thunderbird patch of the 45th Division, a powerful Native American symbol, with the same reverence he carried his Medal of Honor. For many, Barfoot was not just a war hero, he was a cultural hero, demonstrating that the warrior spirit endures.
If you were to ask Colonel Van T. Barfoot what motivated his extraordinary actions, his answer was always the same: duty. He had an old-school, unwavering belief in the principles drilled into him during his early years in the Army, and these principles guided his entire life. He often spoke about the commitment a soldier makes not just to the flag, but to the person standing next to him. His attack on the Panzer tanks wasn't driven by a desire for glory. It was driven by the immediate necessity of saving his company, who were pinned down and dying. The welfare of his comrades was paramount. This philosophy was summarized by the Army's core values: duty, honor, country. For Barfoot, duty meant doing what needed to be done regardless of the personal cost. Honor meant maintaining integrity and respect in all actions, both in war and in peace. Country meant a commitment to the ideals and institutions of the nation he swore to protect. He was known for his quiet demeanor, his firm handshake, and his complete lack of pretension. He saw heroism not as a spontaneous burst of emotion, but as the result of disciplined training meeting a moment of crisis. His life, both his 34 years in uniform and his decades of retirement, was a testament to the power of these simple, profound values. Even in his later years, his commitment to duty remained so fierce that it would lead him into a final, very public confrontation, not with a foreign army, but with a local government.
In 2009, when Colonel Barfoot was 92 years old and living in a subdivision in Henrico County, Virginia, he became involved in a dispute that once again propelled him into the national spotlight. This time, the battle was over a matter of respect for the American flag. Barfoot had a large, beautiful flagpole in his front yard, from which he proudly flew the Stars and Stripes. His homeowners association, HOA, informed him that the size and location of his flagpole violated their regulations and ordered him to take it down. The order was met with swift national outrage. Here was a decorated veteran, a Medal of Honor recipient who had personally faced down enemy tanks to preserve the freedoms the flag represented, being told he couldn't display it on his own property. Barfoot's reaction was measured but firm. He stated publicly that he had fought for the right to fly that flag and that he would not take it down. He stood his ground with the same resolve he showed at 75 yards from a Panzer. The issue became a national news story, symbolizing the tension between bureaucratic control and deeply held patriotic values. In the face of overwhelming public opinion, media pressure, and the obvious injustice of the situation, the HOA backed down. They rescinded their order and agreed to allow him to keep his flagpole. It was a final, small, but intensely symbolic victory for the retired colonel, proving that the quiet resolve of the warrior never truly fades.
Colonel Van T. Barfoot lived a life that spanned nearly a century and encapsulated the major military conflicts and social changes of modern America. He was a link to a past generation of warriors, a man who saw history happen on his watch and helped to shape its outcome. His enduring character was marked by 3 key traits. First, humility. Despite possessing the nation's highest award for valor, he never allowed himself to be placed on a pedestal. He always directed praise to the men who served alongside him. Second, resilience. His decades of service, across 3 wars and multiple ranks, demonstrated an incredible ability to adapt and persevere through the most challenging circumstances the world could offer. Third, patriotism. His quiet love for his country was not expressed in grand speeches, but in the simple, continuous act of service, and later in his refusal to take down the flag he had fought for. He remained active well into his 90s, continuing to attend Medal of Honor Society events and sharing his wisdom with new generations. He was a hero whose fame never corrupted his core values. He was a man of the earth, a Muscogee warrior, and a dedicated officer. His story is a powerful narrative about how extraordinary courage often resides in the most ordinary and humble of men.
On March 2, 2012, Colonel Van T. Barfoot passed away at the age of 92. With his passing, America lost one of its most distinguished heroes, and the Muscogee Nation lost one of its most revered sons. His legacy is not merely the destruction of 2 German tanks with a bazooka from 75 yards away, impressive as that feat was. His legacy is the completeness of his service, over 30 years in uniform, fighting in 3 major wars, rising from private to colonel, and earning the Medal of Honor, all while remaining a humble, dedicated family man. He stands as a testament to the powerful, often quiet heroism found in the American military, a man who faced down the most terrifying threats of armored warfare with nothing but a shoulder-fired rocket and unflinching courage. The story of Technical Sergeant Van T. Barfoot continues to inspire. It is a reminder that bravery knows no bounds of rank or circumstance. When the moment demanded an impossible act of courage, the quiet warrior from Oklahoma stepped forward, secured the victory, and returned to his duty. The road he cleared in Italy allowed an army to advance. The life he lived gave an entire nation a hero to remember. His spirit endures in the Thunderbird Division, in the veterans he served, and in the enduring symbol of the American flag flying high on a pole in Virginia, a flag he proved, time and time again, was worth fighting for.